Matters. I'm your host, Javier Betancourt, Executive Director of the Citizens Independent Transportation Trust, or CITT. That is the agency charged with overseeing your half-penny sales tax for transportation. I want to thank community newspapers for hosting us here in their studios as always. And today we have an amazing guest. It's Patrick Goddard. Patrick is the president of Brightline Trains. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Morning, Javier. Great to be here. Thank you.
No, thank you for being here and taking the time. A lot of really interesting things happening at Brightline, so I think we'll have a full show today. But first, tell us, for those living under a rock and don't know about Brightline, tell us what it is.
Yeah, sure. Well, Brightline is the first privately funded intercity passenger rail system in the United States in over 100 years. The last person to do this was Henry Flagler when he built a train from Jacksonville to Miami. So really in the United States, there are no systems.
It's the same company, right? I mean, this is...
Yeah, it's yes, we certainly have history. In the United States, there really is no intercity passenger rail. And what I mean by that, by intercity as opposed to commuter, is densely populated cities that are connected with congested highways that fall into the category of too short to fly, too long to drive. So, 250 to 500 miles in distance. It just doesn't really exist in the United States with the exception of the Acela in the Northeast, which is probably the closest, where you've got trains running from New York to Philly, New York to DC. But it really hasn't existed in the United States. So we're running trains today between Miami and West Palm Beach, but the ultimate goal is to connect South Florida with Central Florida. So later this year, we'll be connecting our train into the Orlando International Airport. So you'll be able to take a train from Miami to Central Florida in about 3 hours and 15 minutes. No traffic, no weather problems, no needing to stop on the side of the road, stop at a rest stop. So we're very excited about that. It's the first time that it's happened in the United States in a long time. So we started the company back in 2017, and we've been running Miami to West Palm Beach. We recently opened a few additional stations, which we can talk about. But as I said, this is an exciting year for us because we're finally, I think, going to make this product a lot more relevant for the South Florida market because you're going to be able to take it to Orlando.
Okay, and we'll talk about the trains and everything associated with that in a second, but let's learn more about you. So I'm judging by your accent that you were not born and raised in Miami.
I wasn't.
So tell me about your background, what professionally and personally, and what brought you here.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm like almost a Miami person now. So I did marry into a Cuban family. Okay. And I've lived here for about 15 years now. But I was
you're native. Never mind.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm pretty much there. But I was born and educated in Ireland and moved here in 2000, so 22 years ago. So my background was in the hotel industry. I went to hotel school. I worked for Hilton in Europe. I came over here and worked for Lowe's Hotels and Rosewood Hotels, and then I worked with a number of different hotel management companies in the 4- and 5-star hotel space. My last role was I was the president and chief operating officer of a company called Trust Hospitality, which operated in about 10 different countries, 20 different markets, mostly U.S., Caribbean, Central America, Latin America, and we ran 4- and 5-star hotels there. So I always loved the hospitality industry. I loved development of hotels, so architecture, interior design, and then setting up a great guest experience. A lot of people ask me, like, how did you end up being in the train business?
Yeah, you beat me to it.
Right. Really, when Brightline was conceived of, the founders understood very clearly that it wasn't going to be just about selling the commodity of transportation. It wasn't just about getting people from A to B. It was going to be about creating an experience around that. And that's really how I ended up in this seat, because that's what I've spent most of my career doing, is creating experiences, both in the physical environment and in the digital environment. So you really need both today, which we can talk about a little bit more. But that's my background, and I've been at Brightline now for 6 years. I joined in 2016, so it's been a little over 6 years now.
So yeah, let's talk about some of those elements that make this a great guest experience. Because again, for anyone who hasn't taken it, this is not your everyday train.
Right.
This truly is a luxury experience. Tell us about some of those amenities and how you make that reality.
So the commodity of getting people from A to B in a faster, more eco-friendly way we consider those things table stakes, right? That can be offered by most transportation, mass transit systems or intercity passenger rail systems. Where we wanted to go above and beyond was we really wanted to think about the guest experience from end to end. How do they get from their house to the station? How do they park at the station? How do they enter the station? What kind of experience do they have when they walk into our lobby? When they go up the escalators to the departure lounge, as they pass through into the departure lounge itself? What's that waiting area like? What amenities are available to you while you are there? What's the boarding experience like? Then when you step onto our train, what is that environment? How does it look? How does it feel? Is it comfortable? Is it functional? Do I need to crawl under my seat to plug in my phone? Or can I see myself in the mirror? Is the bathroom, do I need to wear a gas mask walking into the bathroom? As for those of you who've experienced some other train systems around the world and around the country, that's sometimes the case. So we wanted to become the antithesis of what I think people perceive train travel to be. A lot of people think of it as kind of dank and gray and sad, and we wanted to be the opposite of that. We wanted to be bright, and we wanted to be airy, and we wanted to be modern, and we wanted to be forward-thinking, and that's the type of experience that we've tried to deliver. So we put a lot of thought and effort into things like architecture and interior design, guest experience, customer service, training for our team, hiring people through the lens of our beliefs that train travel in America can be great, and we've made those investments in our people and in the environment that we've created at our stations and on board our trains. And then, as I referenced, the digital experience today is as important. Even though, up until last December, we were a 3-stop, 67-mile railroad, but people expect the technology to work as well as like Delta, right? So trying to meet that expectation has been a challenge, to have a great digital experience and have that be commensurate with the physical experience, but we're getting there.
No, everything I've heard and everything I've experienced myself certainly lends credence to that. You've achieved that. I call Brightline the Ritz-Carlton of trains. I mean, it really is a whole different experience. So feel free to use that. I haven't trademarked it.
I love it.
Yeah, so one of the things you touched on, which I think is critically important, not just for Brightline, but for any transportation solution, is that first last mile connection, right? You could have the best train going to the best places. If you can't get to the station or get from the station to your destination easily, chances are you're going to go in your car, right? It's just more convenient in many ways. So tell us about some of the innovative things you're doing for that first last mile.
Yeah.
I think there's a partnership with Uber that was recently announced, for instance.
Yeah.
Please.
So it's really interesting, from a psychological perspective, people perceive friction differently. People don't think there's any friction in regards to getting into their car, because it's so easy to walk out your front door and take your keys out of your pocket and get in the car and drive off. But what they don't appreciate in that experience, the friction is in the middle or at the end of the experience. When they get stuck in traffic, or they can't find parking, are they got to drive to the 10th floor of a parking garage or whatever it is, and then walk somewhere anyway, or pay $50 for parking on South Beach. So
and meanwhile, while they're driving, they can't be on their phones. They can't be doing work. Right.
So they don't think about that friction. They just think, okay, I can leave now, right? I can leave now, and I'm on my way. The friction involved with train travel is at the opposite end of the journey. It's getting to the station, and then it's getting to your final destination. And for some people who need to travel on both ends, it introduces a lot of mental gymnastics, because now I have to think about, how do I get to the station? How long is that going to take, and how much is it going to cost? And then how do I get from my destination to my final destination? How long is that going to take, and how much is it going to cost? And then how am I going to get back from there, and so on. So this is a perennial problem for train travel and for mass transit, and a difficult one to solve. But what's happened in the last decade with what's now being called, everything has an acronym, mobility as a service, MaaS, the evolution of that technology, it's now starting to enable some of those first and last mile connections And it's, there's sort of different levels of mobility as a service, with the most basic being, okay, I'm able to plan my trip, but then I got to book everything on my own, to the most sophisticated being, I can plan, book, pay for, and get ticketed for my first and last mile, all in one transaction.
seamless.
All seamless. And that's what we're striving for. So, we recognized this phenomenon when we operated back in 2018. We regularly survey our guests, and we heard frequently from them that, for a lot of people who use the train, and for some people who chose not to use the train, the friction, they ranked getting to and from the station as pretty high on their list of things that were preventing them from using the train or from using it more frequently. So as an experiment, last November, we introduced something called Brightline Plus. And again, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we would do that. And we had looked at Uber back then, and we'd looked at other partners. We ended up deciding that we were effectively going to fully subsidize this experiment. And we provided private Teslas for people who bought premium. We provided shared vans and golf carts for people who rode in Smart. And, we then set up some fixed route shuttles to get people to the airports and the ports. And we also then partnered with Via on the technology side, who I think the county has worked with as well, to allow people to book that first and last mile inside the app in conjunction with their train ticket. So that was the experiment.
Up to 5 miles out.
Yeah, it was 5 miles radius of our stations. So that was the experiment, and we ended up. The results of that experiment were that 30 to 40% of our guests wanted to use this service, either at one end or at both ends, and so that was great learning. And then we learned a lot of other things about travel patterns and where people wanted to go and what were the most popular destinations. We learned a lot through that experiment. It was a very valuable experiment. But, and ultimately where we landed was we couldn't actually meet the demand anymore with our private cars. Like, what we learned was we had our own fleet of vehicles. We had, anywhere between 30 and 40 vehicles just at Miami alone. And what you would find is you just couldn't turn a car around twice an hour. So we've got a train every hour. We just couldn't turn a car around twice an hour. So people would book premium, and they wouldn't be able to. We just wouldn't have any cars left. We just didn't have options. We were working with Uber to kind of supplement, but it was clunky the way that it worked technology-wise. Are we giving people vouchers for Ubers and so on? And it's still not perfect, but so that's why we said we've got to move to a more reliable partner on this rideshare side. So that has a sort of unlimited inventory. Right. Like having our own, like, it's really cute to have our own cars milling around downtown, the downtowns of all three cities. We loved having the vehicles out there.
It's great branding.
And I have a plan for bringing them back, which, I'm not ready to disclose yet. But for now, we've established this relationship with Uber, and it has gone very well. I'm really impressed with how well our own team has been able to integrate the technology in this very seamless way. You're able to reserve your Uber, for first and last mile, and this time around. So now instead of getting a free Tesla in premium, you're getting a free Uber in premium within the 5 mile radius, and then everyone else can just tie their Uber to their train ride. You're protected from surge pricing. You don't have to have an Uber account to be able to utilize the service.
Although who doesn't at this point? But maybe I'd be surprised.
True. But you might have international guests. I mean, even then. But you don't need to have it. It doesn't need to tie into. It doesn't need to take you to Uber to do it.
Right.
It all happens inside of our environment. So you're able to book first and last mile. You're able to figure all of that out. And then what we're working on is, and this is where we may be able to use our, some of these wrapped cards. But what we're working on is making vehicles available at our stations that you can pick up and rent on an hourly basis.
Okay.
We think that would be meaningful to a lot of our customers today, because I think, certainly if you're just kind of going from the station somewhere and then coming straight back, Uber probably works.
Right.
If you're making 3 stops, or you got to go do something, or you got to go
exploring
pick
the
something
area,
up,
whatever.
So we want to make that easier for people. So Uber was step one. We have lots of subsequent steps. We're continuing our fixed route shuttles to the ports and the beaches in all three cities. We're working, as you probably know, in Aventura on the shuttle to the mall until we get the bridge in place, which we can talk about. So we're running all of those additional components of the fleet, and then we're now looking to integrate more mobility providers into that system. So we already have Bright Bikes in West Palm, but we want to integrate public transportation. We're working with Miami-Dade Transit on integrating Metro Rail. We'll integrate Tri-Rail, the Mover, just again, from a planning perspective and from a ticketing perspective. So phase one will be, we're going to tie them all in from a planning perspective so I can plan my trip, incorporating Brightline with these other options. And then phase two will be fully integrated where I can make my payment, I can get tickets, et cetera. So that's the program, but we think that ultimately, and then in Orlando, we're dealing with much different distances, whereas, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, Boca, Aventura, that's really about, shorter distances, 3 to 5 miles. That's kind of like where most people are going, with fairly few exceptions. Orlando's a different story. There was nowhere within
it's sprawling.
within 15 miles.
Sure.
So we're establishing
And you have, I would think, larger capacities of people going to the same place, right?
Yes.
The theme parks, the convention
Correct.
center. So you probably need larger vehicles.
Larger vehicles to move people around. Again, we've got hourly service, so it's very easy to plan. So once we've got everybody on a train in South Florida, we've still got another hour and a half, 2 hours to figure out, to line up whatever fleet is needed to move those folks, which is plenty of time. So our ability to move people around Central Florida, we're excited about that. But, so the idea would be you would arrive at the airport in Orlando, just like 60 million other people do every year. And then you would walk out of our station, which is at the new Terminal C. It's beautiful. It's brand new. You'll walk out of the station at Terminal C, get onto your shuttle, your bus, your limo, your whatever you're going to use, and get to your final destination. And we'll have a whole spectrum of offerings there as well. We'll have the black cars for premium, and we'll have like the 55 passenger buses to get people out to Walt Disney World. So it's just going to depend.
And what I love about the private sector, so, you hear a lot of public-private partnerships, right? And what the private sector brings, in addition to things like innovative financing, is that you're able to experiment, right? In the public sector, we tend to be risk-averse. We're dealing with public taxpayer dollars, so you don't want to make a mistake because you'll hear about it. There will be consequences. So the great thing about the private sector is you're able to experiment with things like that first last mile. Doesn't work out, you learn things, then you adapt. Very nimbly, right?
Yeah.
You're also able to pivot and adapt much more quickly. So just one of the additional benefits of working with the private sectors.
For sure, it's got to be very, and again, not to say that we're, not scrutinized to death.
Sure.
Anyway,
scrutinize yourselves if nothing else.
Right. But we're held to a fairly high level of accountability, and everything needs to be thoroughly vetted before we proceed with it. But yes, I think that if you have a good idea and you can demonstrate your ability to do it and illustrate your odds of success, more often than not, you'll be able to go and do that kind of an experiment.
Right. All right, let's talk about the stations again. So you have what I call the core three, the original Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm. Then you have added the 2 additional stations.
Oh, we added
one of those, right? We helped to
together.
finance the Aventura station, and then Boca. So tell us about those stations in particular. How has land use kind of developed around that? Are they meeting the expectations in terms of the ridership that they're producing and carrying? And are people using it really to commute, or is it just we want to go up to West Palm for performance? Tell us about that regional service, and then we'll move on to Orlando.
Lots of questions in there. So really, if you think about our system, Miami and Orlando are going to be our 2 flagship stations, with Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach being the next sort of level, if you will. So whereas Orlando and Miami will be 250,000 square feet, or West Palm and Fort Lauderdale are about 60,000 square foot facilities. the Aventura and Boca stations are about a half of that again, or maybe even a third, right? They're smaller. The locations were really dictated by a couple of factors, land that we owned adjacent to our railroad tracks, for the most part. That was essentially it, and with the exception of Boca and Aventura, where we had to work with the city and the county to acquire that land. But we sort of identified the quote-unquote wide spot in the road where we could put a station, and then we worked with, the private, in some cases, private owners and the county to get that done. The system was really never intended to be a South Florida system for this long, and there ended up being a longer gap between the South Florida operation and opening to Orlando for lots and lots of reasons, but predominantly our expansion to Orlando involved about 50 miles of greenfield development, which required far more environmental scrutiny than we expected. But we decided regardless to open the South Florida system and start getting some of that learnings. Plus, we believe that ultimately when we go to Orlando, 50-60% of our market's going to be going northbound out of South Florida. It's going to be a lot of people coming out of, in terms of both Miami residents and then international domestic tourists who are coming into Miami anyway, are flying into Miami anyway, who are then continuing north to Orlando. So as we think about that, the relevance of the South Florida market is we have this opportunity to warm the market up, get them familiar with the brand, get them familiar with the product, get them comfortable using the product, so that by the time you turn on Orlando, you've really got your primary market warmed up. In the context of ridership, the three-station system, we really opened in call it January of 2018 with 2 stations, West Palm and Fort Lauderdale. Then Miami didn't open until May. And between May in 2018 and May of 2019, we carried about 1 million people, which is about 300,000 or 400,000 more than we thought we would in the first year. And then,
do you have a sense of how many of those people were commuting versus just?
Yeah, I'm going to give you that whole breakdown now in a second, because that has evolved kind of pre and post COVID.
Okay.
So then we ran for another year. We grew by about 30-40%, and then we shut down for COVID, and then we reopened 17 months later, last November, and then a year later, in December 22, we opened Aventura and Boca. So that's just sort of the chronology of it all. We carried 1.3, 1.4 million passengers in 2022. So that's call it 30% growth, if you will, over 2019. Which, like most transportation agencies were 30-40% below their COVID numbers. So we were 30-40% above, and our fare had gone up by about 15% in that same time frame, because we do dynamic pricing. Then we opened Boca and Aventura in December, and our ridership increased. So in December, we carried almost 190,000 passengers, which would be a run rate of 2.5 million passengers for the South segment. And about 10% of those, believe it or not, came from Boca and Aventura, and that was with only 9 days of those 2 stations.
Wow.
Boca has proven to be, I mean, right now our system is everyone's going to Miami, really. 70-80% of people are going to Miami. And I'll talk about the breakdown between business, commuter, and leisure. But most people are going to Miami. Only about 20-30% of people are going northbound, like out of Miami up to Fort Lauderdale, or out of Fort Lauderdale up to West Palm, or Miami to West Palm, or whatever.
Yeah, Miamians tend not to go north of the border, as we say.
I'm telling you, it's like people joke about it, and there's lots of anecdotes, but it's a fact. Yeah. They just don't. They just like, why would I go to Broward? Like, you talk to a Miami person, it's like, when's the last time you went to Broward? It's like, why would I go to Broward?
We have everything here.
Unless I had a very specific reason, And, Miami people only go to West Palm to have lunch at Restoration Hardware. And that's about it. That's like the only reason we can identify. No, I'm joking, but not really. So the business right now is really all about people coming into Miami for the most part, 70-80% of it. It's not so much the opposite direction. And, that's why Boca has done so well, because again, it's like people who want to go from Boca, again, our target demographic, who want to go into Miami for events. There are a lot more people who live in Boca and work in Miami than you would think.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who live in Boca and work in Fort Lauderdale. So I would say...
And by the way, I would think that the pandemic furthered that kind of experience, right? Because now you may not have to come into the office 5 days a week. You may only have to come in twice. So and you could take Brightline on those 2 days, right?
That's exactly right. Well, the pandemic completely changed how the whole economy here in Florida, but specifically as it relates to commuting patterns, we were kind of nervous, right? Because we didn't know what was going to happen to commuting patterns, and like we were tracking sort of the transit recovery indices and these types of things, and by I think March or April of 22, we were already surpassing our pre-COVID numbers. We were kind of beating everybody else on the indices. So today, composition of ridership is, well, giving you a very super specific statistics. I mean, we have about like 1,200 people who own a monthly pass of some kind, or a commuter product, who use it to go to work anywhere between 20 and 25 times a month, something like that. So that's a pretty decent chunk of our ridership, particularly on our rush hour trains. So like our rush hour trains are now reaching capacity.
And for people who don't know, so you have those products available. It's much more affordable than just kind of your single-use tickets.
Correct. So right now, monthly passes from Fort Lauderdale to Miami are priced at around $230. I don't think they're going to be priced at that for much longer, honestly, just because of the demand. Right. And we're just not able to accommodate all the capacity on board the train right now. So we're looking at that, and we've added more trains. We've got trains on the half hour now, at rush hour in the morning and the afternoon, but those trains are full. And then, so that's one group. And then you have business travelers, and some of them own commitment products as well, like a 10-pack or something like that. They travel more like 5 to 7 times a month, less frequent. A lot of attorneys in that category. We're within walking distance of all the courthouses in all 3 counties. So a lot of people take advantage of that to prepare for their case and, have a cocktail on the way back, depending on how things went.
You're either celebrating or drowning in sorrow.
Exactly. So business travelers, and then, South Florida has a lot of events. So we have kind of become the event train. Heat games, now Dolphins games, with our proximity to the stadium from the Aventura Mall.
Do you run shuttles between the station and the? Okay.
We are just about to start that. So you will see that for the tennis open and for Formula One, and then next Dolphin season we'll be running more shuttles.
That exclusively on your own, or are you partnering with the Dolphins and the stadium?
We're sorting through that right now. We're prepared to do it ourselves, but I think we want to do something in partnership with Hard Rock.
I would think it's to their benefit. Right?
You would think so.
Devil's in the details.
Let me make sure I, mark this section of the discussion and send it to the folks at Hard Rock. So we're Food and Wine, Sea Glass, Gulfstream, all these things. People choose Brightline for those events because they don't have to drive, they don't have to park, they don't have, they're all pretty close to our stations. It's a really easy way to get to events. So we've become known for that, for sure. People are not drinking and driving, and they're enjoying premium, and they're having cocktails, and it's like, it's a nice environment. So we've become very popular for events, and then you got like people, for personal use. I'm visiting my family here, or I'm and then you got a lot of tourists as well. You got a lot of folks who are heading to the cruise port, who are driving from points north of West Palm. Park, it's cheaper to, I probably shouldn't say this in a sort of, in the county may not like this, or the port may not like this, but a lot of people find it cheaper to park at our train station and take the train to Miami and a shuttle to the port, or an Uber to the port, than driving. There's more friction involved with driving all the way down to South Florida and parking at the port, and it's more expensive to park there. So anyway, so That's kind of the mix. So it's really, I would say 20-30% commuter business travel and 60-70% leisure events, personal use.
Okay. And I know we will hopefully have a real commuter service in the near future.
Yeah.
Yeah. The county is studying what they call the Northeast Corridor, and that would have, it's a separate service from Brightline. It would have multiple stations kind of throughout the county at a more accessible price point, right? We don't need to get into that, but I just wanted to note that that's also in the works.
That is in the works. So it's really about how can we allow the county to leverage the infrastructure that we've already paid for and built so that they can deploy, like in fairly short order, a system that can service up to 5 stations between Miami and Aventura.
Right.
And that's really why.
And then hopefully beyond into Broward.
And then hopefully beyond into Broward. That's right.
Tri-Rail Coastal Link.
That's right.
Idea.
That's right.
May or may not be Tri-Rail.
Right. We don't know. And again, we're sort of, our view is we've got this infrastructure, we have capacity. If this is something that's accretive to the community, we want to work with the community to try and figure this out. So a lot of work has been done on it, and it is making progress, and I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for the county to take advantage of our existing investment.
No, and ultimately that's why I will tell you at the CITT in the county, we did invest in Miami Central and then also in Aventura.
Yeah.
With the idea that we will have, true commuter rail there in the future. So.
And that is the vision, I mean, I think that this is the state, and particularly South Florida, has got such rapid population growth, such terrible congestion, and like it doesn't matter, how much more we invest into the highways. It doesn't really improve things,
right.
In a meaneful way.
Induce demand. The more highway you build, the more.
It's kind of like, do you have any empty closets in your house? It's the same idea. So
my wife.
So it's this problem that we're going to face. Like we need to be thinking. If you start to think about 20, 30, 40 years. So there's an analogy that I like to use to contextualize where Florida is. If you look at the Northeast Corridor, Philly to New York, in many ways there are a lot of similarities in terms of demographics, psychographics, income levels, population density, GDP output's almost identical. Like we're catching up, right? When you look at our state, or the East Corridor of the United States, including Central Florida, and the Northeast Corridor, but we're about 100 years behind them in terms of transportation infrastructure. We just are.
And land use, frankly. Yeah.
So people don't, people don't sort of see that yet. A lot of the people who are moving down from the Northeast are seeing it, and they Brightline resonates strongly with them. And they're like, well, like how else am I going to get around down here, right? And these opportunities that we have right now, there's a very special moment in time in terms of infrastructure, the infrastructure bill, and the availability of capital through the public sector to invest in some of these transit assets. Now is the time to do it, and I think there's been some strong leadership from Mayor Cava and Euless Cleckley and others to make those things happen.
Yeah, the stars are really aligning.
It really does take some bold leadership, and that's what's needed now. We need champions for this, in the sort of political realm, to get these things like on the docket. Let's have our number pulled so we're ready to receive some of that funding and make those investments to improve transit in South Florida.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're running out of time. I think we went well over the 30 minutes.
Oh, we did?
Which I figured would happen because this is such a fascinating conversation. One last thing, though. Okay, so when is Orlando slated to open?
So it'll be this year. I mean, what we're doing right now is we're about 90% complete on construction. As soon as we're finished and we reach that substantial construction milestone, and we get into testing and commissioning, which is with the FRA, a lot of that time frame is outside of our control, which is why we don't like to communicate a specific date. But at that time, we will be in a better position to start talking about, our opening schedule. So stay tuned. It's coming soon.
But this year for sure,
This
right?
year.
Well, that's great. Yeah.
This year for sure.
Yeah. Look forward to taking my kids up to Disney without having to drive.
Yes.
All right, folks. Well, thank you, Patrick. Thanks for being a guest. Thank you for everything you're doing to help move people around our region. And folks, thank you for tuning in to Mobility Matters. We're here every 2 weeks at 9 a.m. or 9:30 a.m. And I also want to thank community newspapers for continuing to host and produce the show. Thank you, and see you in a couple of weeks.